Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's program from the Sona Foundation in partnership with our friends over in Nashville, Jump.Global. We are really honored to work with Jump.Global to bring you today's seminar on making disaster funds last. I am Ariel Silver. I'm the program manager over at the Sona Foundation. And of course, this seminar came to us and started the conversations about how we could help our friends over here in Los Angeles, where most of us at the Sona Foundation are based, in the wake of the recent LA fires. And as we started talking about that, we also began to talk with some folks over in the Hurricane Milton disaster area as well, realizing that today's topic is evergreen and also very timely. So both of those ideas. I'm very happy to bring on our guest speaker today, Tate Henshaw. I first want to let you know about some other events that are always happening at the Sona Foundation, some resources and programs. You can find all of that over at sonafoundation.com, and I'll make sure to put that link in the chat box. We are going to have a Q&A at the end of this whole presentation, and so please let us know where you're tuning in from in the chat box, and if you have any questions, and we'll try to get to all the questions over the course of this hour seminar. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to bring on Tate right now. Hi, Tate. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Very good. Thanks so much for being here with us, and I'm just going to let you take it away.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I'll go ahead and get my presentation propped up. Oh, there we go. Perfect. If some of you guys would, maybe comment where you're watching from, that sort of stuff, then it won't seem so much like I'm just sitting here in a box by myself. But that would be great. And definitely, as was mentioned earlier, if you have questions as we're going, please go ahead and put those up. Would love to address some of those while we're in the middle of the content. But if not, then we'll have the time at the end. So again, the guys at Jump.Global and Sona kind of brought this to our attention and gave me the opportunity, which I'm privileged and honored to be able to present on this topic about financial recovery and navigating disaster relief. It's definitely a timely subject. I was just in Los Angeles last week, saw some of the effects of the devastation there. And also, I'm from Atlanta, so, saw firsthand the devastation of some of the recent hurricanes also. So obviously, probably mentioned it multiple times, financial is only one part of the effects of a disaster such as this, but it is definitely important and something that we want to give you guys as many tools as possible to navigate. So jumping in, okay, thank you, Thomas, for posting that. That definitely makes it real for us. Jumping in about me, or what I like to call, why do you care what I think slide. You can read all this, but really what matters is for the last 17 years, I've been a business manager and outsourced CFO for clients in the entertainment industry, whether it be actors, athletes, or artists. My primary background is in music, so I work with a lot of touring artists, songwriters, producers, record labels, studios, you name it. I've been there, done that. And so I understand that navigating your financial life as a musician is hard enough as it is, let alone when you introduce these scenarios which are totally out of your control. I think music can feel like there's a lot of things out of your control all the time. But definitely when we're talking about a natural disaster, that's clearly out of one's control. So I do serve on the board of Georgia Music Partners. If you're located in Georgia, we would love to have you involved there as well. Similar to Sona, they're just helping musicians in Georgia, helping further the industry, things of that nature. So fine print, again, you can read this, but I did want to address. So we're gonna cover a lot of things. We're gonna cover them pretty quickly because there's a lot to talk about. I want to be clear that this should not be taken as specific financial advice to go do this, go do that. And the reason why is not because we don't believe in what we're saying, but any financial advice should be customized to your personal situation. So I'm a certified financial planner. One of the things that implies is that I'm a fiduciary. So when I'm working with clients, I'm required to do what is best for that client. And so the hard thing here in a scenario like this is it's hard for me to know each viewer's or attendee's specific financial situation and background, because that may imply different strategies need to be used as well as what your goals are. But hopefully you can exit this webinar with a little better toolbox to use, maybe some questions to ask people that you're already working with, maybe potentially, some people that you can ask some different questions, that sort of thing. So with that, we will jump into the content. So first we want to talk about available relief funds and resources. And we put this into a couple different buckets. So first of all, if we're talking about primarily related to the government itself and the things the government itself is doing. So I'm not going to hit you guys with like 100 websites while we're talking through this, but there are a few that I think are very relevant. And these are relevant not only because of the exact website, but it is a portal to a lot of the information we're going to talk about. So there's a website, disasterassistance.gov. Okay, so disasterassistance.gov. If you go there, again, for the government, I think it's a pretty easy to navigate website. Sometimes that's not necessarily the case, but what's really interesting there is FEMA, some of the relief that they're doing. They have a lot of different types of scenarios that you can be in. So are you a veteran? Are you a family with kids? Do you have a disability? Are you in California? Are you in North Carolina? Are you in Georgia? Are you in Florida, et cetera? And it's kind of almost a little way to slice and dice the data that they have there and really help you to zero in on the potential relief that you may be eligible for in your specific situation. So definitely check that one out because FEMA has some relief available there. Then moving forward, again, I just want to be clear. We could probably talk for an hour about just FEMA, but this is more about, hey, here are some of the things that you can look into and help you on your way. So there could be more specific situations, and if questions come up later, we can get into those. But with the SBA, some of you guys may have heard about EIDL loans when we were in COVID. And what an EIDL loan is an economic injury disaster loan. So clearly that pretty much applies to what we're talking about today, in that there's been an economic injury sustained during a disaster. However, the L is very important in that it is a loan. Many times we think of disaster assistance as a grant or a gift, whatever you want to call it, but this is actually a loan. So relatively low interest rates, but it is required to be paid back. This is not the same as what we thought of as the PPP loan, payroll protection program loans during COVID, that many of which were forgiven if you met certain requirements. The EIDL loans do need to be paid back. Okay. And we're going to talk about some music industry specific funds that are similar or they may be more classified as advances, but either way, it's very important when you understand any of these types of support, uh, do they need to be paid back or not? That's probably obvious, but I think a lot of times it's easy to assume that they don't need to be paid back. And then one other thing, well, I wanted to touch on some of the things related to your taxes and the IRS. So first of all, many times when we're talking about natural disasters, there is relief in the way of um, extensions for when your taxes are due. And the hurricanes and flooding victims that were in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas receive relief in the way of having their 2023 returns delayed until actually May 1st of this year, if you were on an extension. So instead of being due October 15th, they're now due May 1st. And for the fire victims, there was an extension automatically to October 15th. Now, normally you can still get an extension on your personal return from April until October anyway. However, they are also delaying in this scenario some of the interest due to late payments as well to that October date. And that's important because normally when you file an extension, your payments are still due. We're not going to spend a lot of time of whether quarterly or whatever, but usually they're due by April. And then if you file an extension and you pay in October, there's some interest on those, but they're actually delaying some of that interest as well. Definitely check with your tax preparer to make sure you understand it before you go ahead and take that, because it wasn't clear. I don't think if you owed quarterly that they're delaying some of that on the Q1, Q2, Q3 estimated payments. But I believe the Q4 payments, they are delaying that interest. So then another thing that a lot of people don't realize is if you have a casualty loss, which can really quickly feel like someone died based off the way normal people talk to each other. But what we're talking about, this is kind of an insurance speak. So a casualty loss is where you had property that was damaged or destroyed. So if you have that, in certain scenarios, you can actually use that as a write-off on your taxes. So again, talk to your tax preparer, but potentially if you had a loss, and key thing being you were not reimbursed by insurance or you're not going to be reimbursed by insurance, you could be able to write that off. There's some fine print around, what your AGI is, and there's some weird, $100 deducted from the total amount you get back, almost as like a deductible. But the point being, that is an opportunity that you can take advantage of that most people don't know about, because you're not normally having a natural disaster come in and destroy your property, obviously. A couple other things there. Any FEMA aid is not taxable. But the rest of these relief funds, as we go through them, make sure that you're checking for everyone that you apply for. Is this taxable? Is it a gift, etc.? That's extremely important and not always clear up front. So good question to ask. Now, just real quick as well before we move on, retirement distributions. If you have a retirement account, that may not be most of us, but for some of you, if you have a 401k, IRAs, different things, there are some rules around natural disasters where you can get some of that money out without the interest and penalties that are normally associated with early withdrawals. Okay, so keep that in mind if you are in a spot where you need those funds. You also may be able to take loans under different circumstances. However, those would need to be paid back, or you could end up having to pay those penalties and income taxes on those amounts. And then lastly, before we move on to more of the industry specific stuff, Unemployment. So, you know, normally musicians, we're kind of in the gig space, right? The gig worker space. They kind of almost based it off of a music way of life of doing gigs and stuff like that. So if we're not normally employees, for the most part, we're not able to take advantage of unemployment because we weren't per se employed on the front end. We were contractors, we were work for hire, whatever that may be. However, there is a disaster unemployment assistance program, which you may qualify for if you lost your job because of a disaster, presidentially declared disaster. You don't already receive unemployment, can't get to your job because of a disaster, you can't work because of a disaster related injury. Okay. So that's a little outside of the normal rules that we're accustomed to. So don't think just because you wouldn't qualify under normal circumstances that you don't qualify now. It's definitely something to check into. All right, so let's keep it moving. I feel the pressure of our timing and the amount of stuff that we really need to cover. So, music industry specific funds and resources. I was what I would say pleasantly surprised, but I think almost shocked at the amount of funds that are available specifically in the music space. And I'm not going to rattle off 500 URLs for you again, but what I would recommend is use the resources that Sona has put together at sonafoundation.com/LA fires. That's LA-fires. You can also find that from the Sona Foundation homepage. It was scrolling underneath here as well. And they've done a great job of connecting you to a lot of those resources. There's a lot of links. They've done a lot of the research for you. And one of the great resources there too is kind of a crowdsourced, almost Google Sheet. Not almost, it is a Google Sheet, I believe. And so people can add context, talk about, how you were affected and what you may be available for, really creating some of that connection and that crowdsourcing to help you find some of that stuff. But I did want to touch on these couple that I have mentioned here. And I want you to think about it, not just as, okay, well, one of these four worked for me, but understanding how different they can be in what they provide and what they require, because that's the way you're going to want to approach when you go to that website and you're navigating around and there's 50 different links. Well, okay, is this taxable? What does it require? Do I qualify, etc.? Really approaching it in that way, because for Sona, for their specific, they're still accepting applications, but you need to make sure they're looking for you to have 3 songwriter credits, because it's for songwriters and or composers. You're going to need to provide a W-9 so they know where to pay the funds to. And they're also looking for, PRO affiliation, really whatever you can provide. They're needing to show that you have those credits, you are a songwriter, so that you can be eligible. And I think it's really easy when you're you and it's your life and you're thinking, well, can't they do that? But when you're applying to any of these, I think you need to understand, there's a lot of people and a lot of volume, and a lot of applications to go through. And many of the people going through these applications are also going through the same scenario, right? Some have lost homes and been displaced and all those things as well. So really, if you can try to make it as easy as possible for them to navigate, that's really going to give you a leg up with getting approval, and not only getting approval, but getting approval faster as well. And then, so let's do Music Cares. So check this out. This is similar but different, right? Individuals are eligible for Music Cares disaster relief support after 3 years employment in music in any capacity or credit on 6 commercially released recordings, right? So those are two kind of very different things. You could get 6, credit for 6 recordings in theory, almost, in no time, but it's that or 3 years employment in music in any capacity. It's also interesting. Part of what they're offering is a combination of financial funds and grocery cards that you can use at the grocery store. And then for sweet relief, they're talking about 3 years with more than 50% of your income from the music industry or as a musician, plus proof of the negative impact on you. So for that, think about that, more than 50% of your income. So they're going to need to not only know what you did in music, but what you did overall so that you can justify that you're over 50% of that income. So if you don't know where your tax return is and that sort of thing, you're probably going to need to chase that down so that you can use that when you're applying for that relief. And then, for AFM, for example, in the top right there, that's union. So that's for current members. So if you're not current, make sure you're active and current member if you're applying for one of those reliefs. And there's lots of others, ASCAP did some stuff, Jazz Foundation, Crew Nation. There's a lot of options again, which is really cool. Again, go to SONA, to the LA Fires site and peruse the list there. Check out the crowdsourced info and then really zero in on what do they need us to provide and what is the relief that they're providing and is it taxable. So then let's keep it moving. So music industry advances. I wanted to classify this differently because I want you to think about it differently. And for those of you guys on PROs, a lot of times, especially depending on the volume of royalties that you're pushing through, a lot of the PROs, not unlike a label, et cetera, are willing to pay you in advance. Maybe you're on a publisher too, maybe a Cobalt or someone like that, similar. And I wanted to lay it out here because advances can be great when you need money. However, understanding that means your royalty stream is going away until that advance is recouped. And I added in Sound Royalties here because Sound Royalties has an offer related to the fires, which is great. It's a no cost, no fee, up to $50,000 royalty advance. But you need to think about that differently from a Sweet Relief, Sona Foundation, Music Cares, etc., because it's an advance on your royalties and it will be taxable when you receive it. So if you're thinking you're going to get that and then you're planning on, when we're talking about budgeting in a few minutes, you're planning on using those royalties for your budgeting, you could be in trouble because you've just taken that advance. Or you take the advance, you spend it all on the stuff that you need to spend it on, getting your house fixed back or whatever it may be. You're going to owe taxes on that amount when you go file your 2025 taxes. So if we don't plan well for some of these things, then we could put ourselves in a as bad or potentially worse financial scenario than we started in. So be careful with that for sure. And then real quick, just touching on crowdfunding, community support. I know a lot of us have seen, this person's been through something really bad. We're doing a GoFundMe, etc. Just be careful, because whereas the IRS does say this is such typical IRS language they would use. If crowdfunding contributions are made as a result of contributors' detached and disinterested generosity, and without contributors receiving or expecting to receive anything in return, the amounts may be gifts and therefore may not be includable in the gross income for those whom the campaign was organized. Okay, so what does that mean in regular people, the way we talk? So if you organize it specifically just to help somebody out and nobody gets anything, probably okay. Again, remember the disclaimer and talk to your tax advisor there. However, let's say, oh, well, I know a great thing we could do is we could do a live album and get some people from LA and we could raise a bunch of money and blah, blah, blah. Well, when you're talking about the contributors not expecting to receive anything, if they're expecting to receive a recording of that live album, that could change the taxability of that crowdfunding campaign. So you need to be careful there before you get too far down the road. And again, you go give all the money away, then you get stuck with a tax bill potentially. Again, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but you want to know that when you're setting it up and going through it, not after the fact. Okay, so steps to apply for relief efficiently. Really, this is just about being organized, and it's also about understanding what is required for each individual scenario, whether it be FEMA, whether it be SBA, whether it be SONA or Sweet Relief or AFM or Music Cares, whatever it is, really understanding what is required there. And then also, I would just recommend you, a lot of times we have a hard time really going into what we're going through, because whatever it may be, you don't want to relive it. You don't really want to feel like you're having your hand out or whatever scenario that is. But understand that these people want to help you, and the more you can create a connection with them, the more likely you're going to be successful in your application, because some of these aren't unlimited, right? Understand that. So I know a lot of the people on here are very creative and very good with words. Use that to your advantage, However, also understand and balance that with the fact that there could be hundreds, if not thousands, of applications for some of these. So really kind of walking that line between efficiency and really helping them understand you specifically, I think is where you're going to be more successful. And just having all your documents ready, right? Understanding, having your bank info, your W-9, your tax return if that's needed, your 1099s, your PRO information. If you got locked out of that login, get it set back up, Yeah. Okay, Juan, I see your question. We'll come back around to that for sure. I want to make sure that we touch on everything, and then we've got plenty of time, Juan, just so you know, for questions at the end as well. So making relief funds last, just as much as it's important to understand all the relief funds and to understand what is possibly out there, it's also really important to understand how to manage those and how to make a plan around that. So I've got a couple things for us to think about. So everybody's favorite word, budgeting, right? Budgeting really is just giving your money, putting a plan around where's your money going to go. And so let's just throw out an example. Let's say you've got potentially a $50,000 advance or a $10,000 grant or whatever it may be. Do you know how long that will last you based off your current living situation, your lifestyle, etc.? A lot of people do not. And so what would be a great first step is just understanding, what does it cost to be you right now? Not only from, non-negotiables, right? You've got shelter, you got food, clothing, but then also what is the potentially non-essential costs that you have right now? And then once you know that, if you understand that, well, this could last 3 months at my current spend rate, or it could last 6 months if I cut some of these things back, that puts you in control, right? If you don't really know where it's at and it comes in and it goes out, your money's controlling you, not the opposite. We want you to be in control of your money. So really understanding, okay, what is the timeline here? And I understand that is difficult right now, because I have clients out there that have lost homes, and some of them don't know when they're going to be able to get back to them. They don't know when utilities are going to be restored, if they're still there. They don't know. There's still many unknowns. But we can't just wait on these different authorities and people to let us know the timeline. We need to, make some assumptions and make a plan based off of that as well as we can, right? And then let's talk about stretching funds. So when we were reviewing this session, this was a little bit of a sensitive topic. And I understand, and I want to be upfront to say, if you have just went through any of these types of scenarios, what we're not recommending is, well, brush your shoulders off and get back out there and, start busking on the corner necessarily. However, what we want to be clear about, and what I want to establish with you guys, is the more different income streams that you have and have the ability to monetize, the more resilient you become for all of these different types of situations. I think an easy one that we can all relate to is in the pandemic. If your only income stream was live performance, you were extremely vulnerable when we went on lockdown, right? However, a lot of us, or a lot of musicians during that time, figured out and understood that there are other income streams. Now, are they as good? Are they as thriving? That's a much different question. But thinking about and having the ability to have different income streams and think about yourself differently and understand that your talents are applicable and able to make money in different ways is going to allow you, again, to be much more financially resilient. And then avoiding pitfalls. So everybody on earth knows all these fires came through California. Everyone on earth knows that this hurricane came through Georgia and North Carolina and Asheville area and all these places, right? But that's great for a lot of the things we've already talked about. The government's trying to help, music industry's coming together, trying to help. But guess what? There's also, unfortunately, the world we live in, there's bad actors, and they know that too. And they want to come help you as well, but not in a way that is usually going to benefit you financially, at least in the long term, right? So really be careful when you're looking at different options. One thing I thought was very interesting, if you go to that disasterassistance.gov, there is actually a page for disaster related rumors. Okay, so clearly FEMA and the government, thought it was important enough to create a whole page there. Not only that, there's actually 3 pages worth of different rumors that are going around that they're then dispelling and helping you understand the actual truth around that. Okay. So that tells me that if they felt it was worthwhile enough to create this page, there's lots of rumors going around. There's lots of people trying to spread misinformation, and there's lots of people trying to take advantage of the people that are in those scenarios. Think about a lot of the scams that we see in the financial world. It's against what? The elderly. It's against the disenfranchised, people who are down on their luck. Because when you're vulnerable, you're much more likely to fall for some of these schemes. And disaster is no different than that. So really be careful, make sure, you talk to someone that's trusted that maybe can help you before you sign off on any of these different things that come across your desk. I could easily see in our scenario people coming in with low ball offers for catalogs because they know people are down on their luck. And in that scenario, maybe a loan would be better because you would maintain the ownership of your assets, right? And so a lot of times it's good to just be able to get a comparison in those scenarios and be able to make informed decision. And then the last one there, just taxability. Again, I think I've hit on it many times, but any of these aids, any of these grants, whatever, if it's a grant, you're probably not taxable. But again, just really be sure to ask that question. Is this taxable? Ask another way to ask that. Am I going to get a 1099 for these funds? So if you get a 1099, that means that's being reported to the IRS as a payment to you that the IRS is going to expect you to count as income. Okay. So I don't believe any of the ones we talked about today are taxable. Well, except for the advances, which we talked about specifically. And we did talk about the crowdfunding potential, but that doesn't mean you don't just assume because some of them are not, that all of them are not. Because sometimes if it's a group that's not a nonprofit, for example, then it may be an expense. They may be coding that as an expense, which means you're picking it up as income on your side. Okay. So again, not to freak anybody out, but I think it's just that one more question that's relevant to ask when you're going through that process. And then long term, I wanted to be clear that this is long term because we talked about financial resilience a little bit, but really that's just building up a buffer so that you're not so dependent on the next show, the next gig, the next royalty check for your life to continue, because then you are extremely vulnerable when obviously a huge disaster like the ones we're talking about, but even a small disaster, an artist that you're working for gets sick and they can't go on tour, different things that we've probably all seen and dealt with. The band's trailer gets stolen with a lot of their equipment in it, those kind of things. You really want to be sure that you're thinking about a way to build that buffer up. But I put long term because it would be extremely insensitive to come on here and say, hey, you just went through a natural disaster. I'm going to need you to build up a 3-month emergency fund, right? Because how is that going to be possible? However, it would be just as potentially damaging for me to not mention, to think about it, because otherwise what I would hate to have happen is for us to come back in a couple years, God forbid, hopefully there's not another disaster like this, but to come back again and we're right back in the same scenario. So that's really what we're talking about, is just thinking about ways, just like with the different income streams, you become more resilient. Also, the more of a buffer or emergency fund, whatever you want to call it, that you can build up, the more resilient you are as well, right? And that just helps you to plan for the future. So again, that was a lot of information really quickly, high level, but we did feel like all of those topics were relevant to cover. And therefore, we wanted to at least give you enough of a direction to where you can know where to go and you can know what to look for and kind of the thought process to use as you're continuing through this process. But that was kind of the end of the formal presentation section. So now we'll go more into the Q&A. So yeah, Juan had the question earlier about taxes. So being a donation, it wouldn't be taxable. So normally, if you're getting this from a nonprofit or it is termed as a grant or something of that nature, then you're right, it's not going to be taxable. However, I'll give you a couple of scenarios that would be relevant to this presentation. So if you did one of these crowdfunding campaigns and you were raising money, but through offering a product, that could be taxable. And so the technical language, again, when you're talking about the GoFundMe, it says if it is a result of the contributors' detached and disinterested generosity, and listen to this, and without the contributors receiving or expecting to receive anything in return, then you're probably okay. However, again, what I was saying is, let's say someone out of the goodness of their heart says, oh, well, I can spin up this quick project. I'll get some artists to do some covers, et cetera, and then we'll forward the proceeds over to someone. If the contributors are expecting to receive something, then all of a sudden you're out of that technical language that the IRS used, and then you're in a bit of a gray area, which you do not want to be in when it comes to taxes. If I get an approved claim for my insurance, does that affect my ability to get grants or financial assistance? The grants are going to be different based off of each one. Normally, if you can show that you were affected, then I don't think you're going to be disqualified from any of those. On the tax side, it would, what I mentioned about claiming a casualty loss, if you get reimbursed by insurance, that would prevent you from writing that off as a casualty loss. As far as the financial assistance, most of the ones I looked at, and again, just to reiterate, there's different requirements for each one. Most of them, it wasn't so much, was it a certain dollar amount? Was it, did you get reimbursed? Whatever. It was more, were you affected? Do you meet these requirements, which are more about who you are, songwriting credits or whatever, as far as the music industry specific stuff. And then as far as the government stuff, it's going to be more about where you're located and how are you affected. So to answer your question, probably not. Definitely on the tax casualty loss thing, yes. But otherwise, I don't think that would prevent you. It may change, the dollar amounts of certain things, potentially, but I don't think it's going to preclude you from applying to most of the ones that I looked at.
Tate, hi.
You're back.
I am back because I wanted to ask you a question that came in over email about deadlines for the different disaster relief programs, whether they're governmental or grants from organizations. Is there a limited timeline, or generally speaking, or what do you know about
Yeah,
that?
well, this is my experience, and some of them certainly have strict deadlines. I'm not going to try to get every deadline on every one we went over today. However, just realize that even if they don't state they have a deadline, sometimes they have a certain amount dedicated to the relief fund. Like maybe they have, $1 million allocated. It may not have a deadline, but it may very well exhaust itself, right? So it's not a formal deadline, but the fund could simply run out at some point.
Good, good. And we have another question here in the chat, so I'll take myself out and bring that one up from Mike.
So when it comes to budgeting, if I feel I'm in the red, where should I cut in my lifestyle first? That's a great question. Um, I was thinking about this and knowing that we're somewhat LA focused. LA is not a cheap place to live, obviously. So I think it's going to be very difficult, or even if you're in any other big city, obviously. Um, I think you really have to examine yourself, and I'm not using that as an excuse to give you an answer, but it could be easy, for example, to say a gym membership or something like that. However, I know for me, being able to exercise and do all those things is also instrumental in my emotional health and my mental health. So I would not go down that road in that scenario. I think in today's times, it's really focusing on food, right? Eating out, even groceries now, anyways, to cut costs there because they've, I would say, crept up, but I would say, leaped up recently over the last couple of years. That's been one of the biggest expenses for me personally and my family that we try to manage. Not always super successful with that. And then really thinking about, things like travel, things like clothing, all those kind of things, right? I think really looking at, I think the biggest thing is what I kind of alluded to, getting your kind of fixed, your mandatory expenses, and then the other stuff over here. Because if you're looking at the whole thing, it can be a little overwhelming to try to tackle. But if you kind of push over here and you're like, there's nothing I can do about this. Now, potentially you could change some of that, but probably not immediately. You might be able to, switch apartments, but your lease runs for 6 more months. Well, in 6 months, we can make that decision. But until then, we're thinking about your non-essential expenses, your what you could, in theory, change, and really focusing down on those and seeing which ones are having the biggest impact for you personally, and which ones can you change. Because yeah, you can reduce food, but how much can you really reduce it? Okay, is there anything I should ask my company if they have maybe employee benefits, and what can help me if they offer employee benefits? Yeah, I mean, there's some companies that have, leave for certain scenarios that you may be able to take advantage of depending on the scenario. You have to also be careful because sometimes you can get leave, but it's either a reduced or no pay situation. They just can't eliminate your position. And it's actually interesting you said that, because one of the finer points on here was if employers provide assistance directly to employees who are in need because of a disaster without going through a charitable organization, that can usually is going to end up being counted as income for you as well. So you need to plan for that taxability. So if they provide funds that are like, repairs, all that kind of stuff, that can end up being counted as income. Yeah, I see Backline. Yeah, one of my good friends, Matt Wilson's on the board of Backline. That's a great organization for the mental health. I think we touched on it briefly at the beginning, but obviously the financial thought process and strategy is only one segment of the impact that this disaster has had on people. So really thinking about your mental and emotional health is really important also, because if you're not in a good place mentally, emotionally, you're going to have a hard time going out and starting to earn money again, or take advantage of these revenue streams or different things. So definitely think about that. And that's a great way to do it in a way that is not going to have a huge negative financial impact on you, because they are helping to provide that care as well. So building a financial safety net. It's really just getting honest with yourself and figuring out how you can live below your means. And I know that sounds easy when you say it, but it can be extremely difficult, especially when we're in an industry that a lot of times is very image related, and very much keeping up with the Joneses a lot of times, especially in certain genres and stuff like that. But really thinking about, paying yourself first. There's a lot of different books and things out there about this, but how can I pay myself first and put some money away so that I can do things later that I want to, right? Or it says I can do something no one else can do tomorrow by doing something no one else would do today. It's putting some of that money away. So really just, I think when you get the numbers on the page too, there's something about that, or in the spreadsheet or whatever it may be. Maybe your bank app can help you with that, or one of the websites that's out there. You know, it's a lot easier to navigate then. And I think a lot of us, and I did this for a long time. You just kind of look at your bank account and you think, oh, okay, there's this much left. And then, you don't really tell it where to go. And then it still goes, whether you tell it or not, is what I've found. So really giving that first job to building that safety net and the emergency fund, and then figuring out how to make the rest work for your expenses. Versus, I think a lot of times by default, we think about doing that, and then when whatever's left, I'll put over here. I don't know how well this worked for anyone on this webinar, but it did not work well for me doing it in that scenario. So I'm always doing that immediately whenever money comes in. And then you do that consistently over time. It doesn't have to be a lot of money, and you turn around and you'd be surprised what you can build up. Yeah, if there's no more questions, I really appreciate you guys taking time out of your day. Feel free to reach out if you need anything, and you can find me on all the platforms, LinkedIn, etc. There's my contact info, email, website, address. Come hang out with us at the office in Atlanta. But I really appreciate you guys taking time, and I really appreciate Sona and Jump.Global thinking of me to present such a timely and important topic.
Tate, I wanted to jump in here and say thank you so much. This was really informative, really great. Really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and share your knowledge with the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all for being here. I wanted to also just jump into that conversation that came up for a moment about mental health. Along with all these disasters, of course, goes a lot of grief and processing the loss. And, you know, we're whole people. Over here at the Sona Foundation. We're really always thinking about the complete person of the songwriter, not just the job of the songwriter. And so we partner with Backline. We talk with Backline all the time. We have a monthly virtual conversation with Backline about different topics within the overall umbrella of mental health. And you can find links to the past conversations on our website. And it's always on the third Thursday of the month. So we'll be having that later on in March as well. We have at the Sona Foundation a grant program called the TAP grant, which is the Therapy Assistance Project. We will be reopening the TAP grant for applications shortly, and that is to provide up to $1,500 per songwriter for mental health support. If you already have a therapist, that those funds can apply to your current therapist. And if you don't already have a therapist, we work with Backline to help you find one. And they have a vetted network of mental health professionals who work with musicians and folks in the music industry and their families. So if you're also tuning in and you're not a songwriter or composer, but you want to tap into the Backline vetted network, you can reach directly out to them at backline.care. And they also work with Sweet Relief. They have some grant money through Sweet Relief. I think they might also have recently launched another grant specifically in response to disaster events and the LA fire. They got a giant shout out coming right after the Grammy Awards and the Recording Academy. So definitely reach out to backline.care and come over to the sonafoundation.com website as well to find links and resources there. If you want to stay plugged in with the Sona Foundation and you're not already on our mailing list, I encourage you to just sign up on our mailing list. It's free. And we will let you know every month what programs and resources we have available. We have an upcoming event at the end of March in Los Angeles, specifically for, it's called Music and Money. It's the fourth seminar in a series that we've been running for the last couple of years. And it's not directly related to the LA fires, but it's related to financial wellness in general for music creators. So we do wish you really well. We still have our application portal open for our LA Fire Relief Grant, which is called the Songwriter Fund. And we are a small team over here. We are making our way through the applications. As Tate mentioned, our grant eligibility requires that you provide credits to show that you have composer or songwriter credits on the music that you're providing. So there's more information about that on our website, and we wish you well. Take good care. And thank you, Tate and Jump.Global. Take good care.